What if I told you that maybe what you call love is, in fact, a refined form of prison? Not with bars, not with handcuffs, but with compliments, promises, and warm silence. Have you ever stopped to think about that? Because Machiavelli, himself, the master of strategy, would have easily recognized this kind of relationship as a power game disguised as romance. That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. How many times have you felt uncomfortable, but couldn't explain why? As if something was wrong, yet everything seemed right. She says she loves you, but somehow you feel smaller. She says she wants the best for you, but somehow you drift further from your best, and you swallow it. Because after all, she's amazing. I'm just too sensitive, right? Are you sure about that? Machiavelli wrote that the most efficient power is the one that doesn't need to show itself, the kind that acts in silence, between the lines, in affection strategically measured. And if there's a place where this kind of power thrives, it's in emotional relationships, especially when a man, with all his good intentions, gives himself to a relationship without realizing that he's not being loved. He's being shaped. That's the first sign. You slowly start to lose your identity. Your habits change. Your voice no longer matters. Your goals are replaced by shared plans you never chose. But it all comes wrapped in sweet words, hot kisses, and promises of a future together. That's not love. That's strategy. And no, we're not saying all women are manipulators, but we are saying that certain feminine patterns, consciously or not, have learned to use emotional control as a way to ensure security, status, or stability. And it's up to you, as a mature man, to realize what you're getting involved in. Not with anger, but with clarity, because the awakened man understands that true love doesn't suffocate, doesn't erase, doesn't control. True love expands, strengthens, builds, and anything that shrinks you, even with a smile, is perfume-covered imprisonment. Machiavelli said, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." In love, the parallel might be, it's better to be respected than adored, if the price of adoration is your freedom. And this is just the beginning, the first sign, and the quietest. Because every manipulation starts with a compliment and ends with a man who no longer recognizes himself in the mirror. Let's keep going. The other signs are even more revealing. The second sign of manipulation is more common than you might think, and more socially accepted too, because it wears the mask of a word every man has learned to fear losing: love. But not just any love. Conditional love. Love with invisible contracts. Love that demands constant proof. Machiavelli would say that the smartest ruler is the one who offers something desirable, under unspoken terms. And that's exactly what happens when a woman says, "If you really loved me, you would do this for me." It sounds like a request, but it's blackmail. It looks like vulnerability, but it's strategy. This kind of relationship is not a partnership. It's a constant negotiation, where you're always being tested, measured, judged, as if every move you make is part of an exam to prove your love. And of course, there's always something more you should be doing. There's always a new condition to be worthy of her love. But listen closely, true love does not require performance. Love is not emotional blackmail. If you constantly feel pressured to prove you're good enough, you're not in a relationship. You're in an audition. Here's the key point. The man who lives to please is not respected. He might be praised. He might be used. He might even be desired, temporarily, but he won't be respected. Because where there's no freedom, there is no love. There's dependency, there's fear, there's emotional submission. Machiavelli reminds us, he who submits to please ends up being despised. Remember, authentic love does not impose impossible conditions. It welcomes, it doesn't demand, it proposes, it doesn't impose. And if the woman you're with constantly reminds you of what you must do to deserve her presence, maybe what she loves isn't you, but the control she has over you. This is the second sign, and it's dangerous, because it disguises itself as care, concern, romance. But underneath it all, it's just a sophisticated form of domination. It replaces passion with pressure and affection with obligation. So I ask you now, are you being loved or evaluated? Let's talk about the third sign. This one doesn't scream, it whispers. And that's what makes it one of the most dangerous, because it's subtle, disguised as jokes, irony, playful remarks, but the impact runs deep. It's the moment you realize she doesn't admire you anymore, and worse, maybe she never did. Machiavelli knew that no leader survives without respect. Love may be unstable, but respect is the foundation of anything that lasts. And in a relationship, it's no different. When admiration dies, what remains isn't love, it's tolerance. It starts with little jokes about your ideas, with looks that say more than words, with subtle comparisons to other men, other choices, other styles. And over time, you start wondering, am I enough? But that doubt didn't come from within. It was planted. This is the soil where silent manipulation grows. Because by constantly and quietly diminishing you, she becomes the standard. Your self-worth, once internal, starts to depend on her judgment. And, once again, you lose control. Machiavelli would say, subtle humiliation is more effective than brutal force, because it leaves no visible wounds, but it corrodes you from the inside. A poisoned compliment here, a veiled critique there, and suddenly you no longer know your own value. So ask yourself, are you with a partner or with a judge? Do you feel like you can grow with her? Or are you always trying to prove that you deserve to stay? Admiration cannot be demanded. It cannot be begged. It's born from respect, from how you live, how you choose, how you stand. And if she doesn't see that, or worse, sees it and insists on tearing it down, then the relationship has already become a battlefield where you don't even realize you're bleeding. That's the third sign, and maybe the cruelest. Because the man who loses the admiration of the woman he's with, he doesn't just lose the relationship, he loses himself, but only if he allows it. Let's move on to the fourth sign. Few men recognize this sign before it's too late, and perhaps that's precisely why it's one of the most effective. I'm talking about control through intimacy. Not intimacy as an expression of love and connection, but as a tool of power, as currency, as a lever of domination. If Machiavelli lived today, he would see this practice as one of the most sophisticated forms of manipulation, because it hides behind the idea of sexual freedom, of bodily autonomy, of choice. But deep down, many times, it's emotional calculation, it's strategic management of male longing. The fourth sign is clear: when sex becomes a reward or punishment. When intimacy stops being spontaneous and turns into a tool for behavioral control. If you act how she wants, you're rewarded with affection, touch, desire. If not, you're ignored, rejected, kept at a distance. This creates a dangerous conditioning. You start shaping your behavior not out of conviction, but out of a desire for approval, not from will, but from fear of deprivation. And once again, you give up control, not of your body, but of your mind. Machiavelli said that a wise ruler keeps the people under control by offering hope and fear. The same applies here: hope for closeness, fear of abandonment. And without realizing, the man bends, adapts, distorts himself. The consequences of this go deep, because when intimacy becomes blackmail, masculinity becomes submission, desire becomes debt, pleasure becomes obligation. What used to be connection is now a contract, and without noticing, you're no longer a partner, you're a petitioner, begging for something that should be natural, negotiating what should be given freely. This is the fourth sign, and perhaps the most insidious. Because while you think you're being loved, you're being conditioned, and love born from the fear of loss is not love, it's dependency disguised as passion. Now we move to the fifth sign. This one is among the most disorienting, because it doesn't attack your body, nor your routine. It targets your perception of reality, and when that happens, my friend, you're no longer sure whether the problem is her or you. Machiavelli wrote that, to maintain control, a ruler may make mistakes, but he must always convince the people that those mistakes were necessary, or better yet, that they were the people's fault. In other words, reversing responsibility is a powerful weapon of domination. In certain relationships, this principle is replicated masterfully. You express pain or frustration, and she replies with guilt. You're too sensitive. You misunderstood. You're exaggerating. Over time, she stops being responsible for her actions and becomes the victim of your misinterpretation. That's the fifth sign. Everything becomes your fault. Her coldness, your lack of attention, her distance, your behavior, Her emotional betrayal? Your absence. And if you dare to react, you're selfish, immature, misogynistic. The effect is devastating. You start doubting your own clarity. You begin to self-censor. You reanalyze everything you say. How, when, why. And in the process, you shrink. You become quieter, smaller, until one day, she doesn't need to manipulate anymore. You do it for her. Machiavelli warned, "He who controls the narrative controls the power." And the most dangerous narrative to lose is your own. Men who live under this kind of moral inversion become emotionally castrated, apologizing for feeling, justifying actions that hurt them, and worst of all, believing that if they just loved more, she would change. But she doesn't, because, for her, it's working. And that's the trap. You think you need to improve to be loved, when in truth you need to wake up to stop being manipulated. That's the fifth sign, and perhaps the cruelest, because it turns your own consciousness into your enemy. It makes your sensitivity feel like weakness, but now you know, sensitivity is not weakness, it's radar. And if that radar is going off, maybe the danger isn't in you, but in the one beside you. Let's move on to the sixth sign. This sixth sign is a true masterpiece of emotional manipulation, and possibly the hardest to recognize, because it's often confused with intensity, passion, even deep love. But it's not love. It's control through instability. It's the art of keeping you emotionally hostage. Machiavelli taught that a ruler, to maintain power, must alternate acts of kindness with moments of harshness, creating a bond of emotional dependence. Sometimes the people love him, sometimes they fear him, but they never leave. Why? Because they're hooked on the hope that the good ruler will come back. And in relationships, the logic is identical. This is the sixth sign. You live walking on eggshells. You never know if she'll be sweet or distant, loving or critical, warm or cold. And this doesn't happen by accident. It's programmed insecurity, a cycle of emotional instability that keeps you from relaxing, trusting, or being your true self. You start measuring every word, reassessing every action, and even when things seem fine, you feel like it could all collapse at any moment. This constant tension isn't a sign of emotional depth, it's a sign of psychological domination. Machiavelli would call this a power retention strategy. Create uncertainty to keep the other in a state of alert. Instead of love, she offers unpredictability. Instead of stability, suspense. And you, trapped in the emotional roller coaster, start confusing intensity with connection. And here lies the risk. When unpredictability becomes routine, your nervous system switches to survival mode. You become addicted to small doses of affection, like someone begging for crumbs of peace, and that addiction disguises itself as love. But its real name is emotionally induced anxiety. If being with someone constantly makes you anxious, that person isn't your cure. They're your trigger. And real love, it's not suspense, it's peace. It's not fear of making mistakes. It's the freedom to be who you are. That is the sixth sign. Insecurity that masquerades as passion, but only serves to keep you orbiting around her, like a lost satellite, always waiting to be accepted again. Let's talk about the seventh and final sign. This may be the most paralyzing one of all. The fear of loss. The feeling that if you take any action, if you set any boundary, if you dare to say no, she'll leave and you'll be alone. Machiavelli said that the most powerful ruler is the one who makes his subjects believe that their stability depends solely on him. And so, even when they're unhappy, they stay because they fear the chaos of a world without that ruler. And here's the key point. When a woman manipulates you with the fear of losing her, she positions herself as the only possible source of love, affection, and connection. And you, believing you won't find that anywhere else, start accepting any condition just to keep the relationship going. Even if it's destroying you, that is the seventh sign. You begin to accept the unacceptable. You tolerate humiliation, disrespect, coldness. You justify cruel behavior, all just to avoid the void you believe would come with the end of the relationship. But that void isn't real. It's a construction, a myth, fed by the manipulation itself. Because the awakened man realizes that fear of loss is the final chain. And once you break it, everything changes. you discover that loneliness is not the absence of love. It's a fertile field for reunion with yourself. You realize your peace is worth more than any toxic presence, and you finally understand. Losing a woman who's destroying you isn't a loss, it's a liberation. Machiavelli would never write about love, but he would certainly write about power, disguised as love. And that is exactly what you need to see. True love doesn't threaten, it doesn't demand submission, it doesn't plant fear. True love lifts you up, gives you ground, and gives you wings. This is the final knot of manipulation, the fear of losing her. But if the price of keeping her is losing yourself, then the only thing you should fear is staying. Now that you recognize the 7 signs, the most important question isn't what she's doing to you, but what you're allowing to be done. Because the true power of manipulation doesn't lie in the manipulator, it lies in the one who allows himself to be manipulated. Machiavelli wrote for princes, for leaders, for men who wanted to understand power. Today, his words apply to you, not because you govern a kingdom, but because you need to reclaim your own. No man deserves to live chained to a relationship where he must ask permission to be himself, where every step is monitored, every emotion is controlled, every dream bent to fit someone else's desires. That is not love. That is internal exile. But here's the good news. No one can stop a man who has awakened. No one can control a man who knows himself. No one can manipulate a man who respects himself. And by making it this far, you've already taken the first step to becoming that man. Emotional freedom doesn't begin when she changes. It begins when you do. When you stop accepting emotional scraps. When you begin saying no to what hurts, and yes to what strengthens you, and if that means starting over, so be it. Because starting over with dignity is better than continuing to self-destruct out of fear of being alone. Loneliness doesn't kill. What kills is living surrounded by people who are killing you from the inside. So if you saw yourself in these signs, don't feel shame, feel pride. Because recognition is the beginning of liberation. And to liberate yourself, my brother, is the noblest act a man can make. If this video spoke to you, if any part of this message made you rethink your story, like, share and subscribe. Not because we need numbers, but because we need awake men. Men who are unafraid to look within. Men who rise, even after being broken. We'll see you in the next video, and remember, no one can take your freedom unless you choose to give it away.